The role of architecture within public healthcare has been profoundly reshaped by neoliberal economic structures, which have increasingly commodified healthcare spaces. Rather than being designed to foster healing, hospitals and rehabilitation centers are often driven by market efficiencies, standardization, and financial incentives. This tradition of healing and architecture that I'm postulating was a continuous one in the West, and feel now has been broken by modernism and the notion of health as a factory. Nowhere is more evident than in the spatial design of spinal cord injury rehabilitation facilities, where economic constraints dictate spatial form, often at the expense of patient well-being. While profit-driven development dominates much of healthcare architecture, activist-led design interventions have emerged as a counterforce. These are, however, theoretical or small-scale endeavors that do not really challenge the dominant economic structures of architectural production. Neoliberalism has reshaped architectural practice, shifting it away from a civic duty towards a market-driven enterprise. Historically, architecture played a fundamental role in shaping public welfare, yet under neoliberal economic structures, it has bifurcated into two modes: profit-driven commercial practice, activist-led design interventions. Post-professional architecture is not and cannot claim to be a public practice, because it appears either as a private, profit-orientated business or an activist action. While the first one derives from neoliberalization of professionalism in architecture and urbanism, the second one is a reaction against this neoliberalization. This divide limits architectural agency, with financial incentives dictating spatial production, often reinforcing standardized, efficiency-driven models that favor economic return over social impact. Once the architectural profession was tied to public service, now it is subordinate to market forces, serving either the interests of capital or resisting them in small-scale, localized interventions. The gods of medicine and healing are much more important to architecture. Architecture's activist potential is not just in political resistance, but in the systematic design of spaces that facilitate care and well-being, a perspective that Maggie centers embody. One of the most striking examples of market-orientated healthcare design in the UK is the Private Finance Initiative. Introduced in 1992 under John Major's government, PFI was designed as a method to privatise the funding of public infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and transport systems. Instead of direct government financing, private sector companies were contracted to design, build, and operate public facilities, which the government repaid over long-term contracts. PFI was promoted as a means of reducing immediate public expenditure while gaining benefit of private sector efficiency. However, PFI hospitals have laterally been criticised for imposing long-term financial burdens on the NHS, prioritising cost efficiency over adaptability, and resulting in rigid, standardised hospital layouts that stress logistical throughput over patient-centred care. English NHS trusts are spending more than $2 billion a year paying back debt on legacy private finance initiative projects, despite the government abolishing the contracts for any new projects back in 2018, with some spending more than twice the amount on PFI debt as they did on drugs. The logic of efficiency has been internalized within the architectural process, reinforcing models of standardization over innovation. It is financial rather than patient-related imperatives that has driven architectural decisions in PFI hospitals, with a view to ensuring hospitals can fulfill contractual obligations to private investors. Commodification of the architectural profession and its transformation to a business pairs with the neoliberal policies of the privatization of the state and public services. These constraints enforce architectural form through rigid, cost-efficient spaces of the hospital, prioritizing private financial interests over flexible healthcare infrastructure. The success of PFI in providing new buildings has been counterbalanced by the reinforcement of neoliberal logic that privileges financial return over spatial adaptability. Long-term PFI contracts have left many hospitals locked in to rigid, investor-driven models, which hold them tight and limit their ability for evolution in response to shifting healthcare needs. Architects have conventionally sought strategies to reclaim control within a framework increasingly dominated by neoliberal economic drivers. Activist-led design interventions represent an important, although limited, response, demonstrating a potential for architecture to affect socially conscious, community-based transformation. One compelling model is the citizen architect, one that champions architects as potential effective agents of deeper social change through grassroots activism, collaborative design, and hyper-local engagement. The citizen architect model exemplifies how architecture can resist full commodification by foregoing human-centered, socially engaged approaches. While the model may be an inspiring overarching vision of architectural agency, it remains largely a measure reliant on external funding, volunteerism, and non-traditional economic structures. In other words, it's rather hard to achieve long-term viability. Core tensions include scalability and replication. Many activist-led interventions take the form of unique local solutions that are difficult to scale up in the absence of broader policy adoption. Its economic viability. Most of these efforts are based on the availability of short-term grants or philanthropic funding, which makes them vulnerable to funding fluctuations. Institutional recognition. Without stronger integration into professional practice and regulatory frameworks, the citizen architect risks remaining an alternative rather than mainstream model for practice. Rather than viewing the citizen architect as a peripheral response, it needs to be viewed as a deep conceptual ground that underscores alternative paths for architectural engagement. The hybrid model builds on these ideas by linking community-led processes with institutional support to ensure scalability, economic sustainability, and lasting impact. The present healthcare architecture paradigm is focused mainly on efficiency, often at the cost of patient-centered care. This trend is more clearly reflected in the popular use of double-sided corridors, spatial configurations where therapeutic settings are marginalized in favor of staff movement and resource allocation. This has been typified in PFI hospitals, with spatial organizations dominated by standardized, cost-driven designs. Further, the dominance of generic repeatable ward layouts guarantees predictable financial outcomes at the cost of more nuanced and longer-term needs of rehabilitation patients. Ultimately, the dominant logistics and metrics of efficiency determine a hospital environment orientated towards throughput rather than healing, a context in which scope for innovation in patient-centered design is inevitably limited. The influences of natural light, access to green spaces, and non-institutional aesthetics are undeniable in their effect on reduced stress, improved mood, and on general happiness. One seminal study, Ulrich 1984, found that patients with a view of nature required fewer pain medications and recovered quicker, compared to those whose view consisted of a brick wall. This evidence from the field of environmental psychology points out the need for healing architecture. However, in many traditional hospital designs, these principles are often compromised for their operational efficiency. A common misconception is that publicly funded healthcare systems like the NHS somehow remain immune from neoliberal forces. The NHS remains, of course, a public service, yet its architectural output remains subject to the exact same private, market-driven efficiencies. Nowhere is this more clearly evident than in the case of spinal cord injury rehabilitation centers, constantly designed as a peripheral addition to a larger hospital complex rather than a self-sustaining therapeutic environment. These rehabilitation facilities are largely driven by cost sharing and resource efficiency, making their operations subservient to the larger hospital structure. Despite patients requiring 6 to 18 months of rehabilitation, these spaces mimic acute care wards, lacking essential therapeutic qualities. Maggie centers offer a powerful counterpoint to this model, demonstrating that healthcare spaces can be designed with patient well-being at the forefront. Unlike standard hospital extensions, Maggie centers are purpose-built environments designed specifically for cancer care, prioritizing natural light, domestic scale architecture, and a non-institutional environment. Maggie centers act as a model which underscore the potential for a decentralized, anthropocentric approach, thereby bolstering the case for a hybrid rehabilitation framework. Though neoliberalism has fundamentally reshaped healthcare architecture, charity-led initiatives provide an alternative framework that puts patient first while remaining economically viable. By adopting non-profit funding models, public-private partnerships, and community-driven investments, charities can resist the commodification of rehabilitation spaces and make sure that architecture meets a different set of needs than the purely financial ones. If we are to resist the commodification of rehabilitation spaces, then we must, as Jenks suggests, look again at hospitals, healing, medicine, and its relation to the spirit, and its whole relation to other architectures. Maggie centers exemplify this by interrogating architecture, landscape, and social support, demonstrating a tangible, systematic alternative to neoliberalized healthcare environments. This principle underpins the hybrid rehabilitation model, which seeks to reintroduce community-driven care into mainstream healthcare infrastructure. Charity-driven healthcare institutions have long provided critical services outside of constraints of state and market funding. Organizations such as Maggie Centers and also St. Oswald's Hospice in Newcastle exemplify how non-profit models can create specialized, patient-focused environments that prioritize well-being over efficiency metrics. A key component of this model is the role of Spinal Research, an organization dedicated to funding cutting-edge research and supporting specialized rehabilitation care for SCI patients. Through targeted fundraising initiatives such as the Great North Run, Spinal Research could contribute to the development of purpose-built rehabilitation facilities, ensuring that patients and researchers coexist within the same environment. This positions SCI rehabilitation within a national framework akin to Maggie Centers, showing its replicability. Moreover, the charity-integrated hybrid model provides an achievable means of transition for existing rehabilitation facilities. All of the current regional SCI rehabilitation centers located on large campuses of hospitals may easily be repurposed as standalone hospital wards to meet rising demand for acute care beds. Since they were never designed for rehabilitation in the first place, their integration into the general infrastructure of a hospital is logical and efficient, further underpinning the viability of the hybrid system. Neoliberal market forces have dramatically shaped healthcare infrastructure, often at the expense of patient well-being in favor of efficiency and cost-effectiveness. However, charity-integrated models of rehabilitation provide a viable, systemic counterforce to this trend, a financially sustainable yet patient-centered alternative. The hybrid rehabilitation model is based on the ideas of the citizen architect, moving beyond individual activist-led projects in order to create a systematic and implementable framework that can operate at scale. This model's integration of charitable aid, institutional expertise, and distributed care is significantly improved by the NHS infrastructure already in place, which provides a foundation of specialized resources and clinical expertise. This enables seamless collaboration between rehabilitation, research, and acute care services and makes this approach very practical and expandable. This model proves that healthcare environments can and should be designed around human needs and not simply around economic gain.